with reviews, the culture of it. But I also think that when comedians get upset about reviews, like I got upset about that one, but that was quite a unique scenario. But if you get upset about reviews, it's only because you read them. And I have the same opinion about comments, and I'm very rigid. Like everybody I know that blows up in the industry, and even before they blow up, I tell them that the most important thing is to not read comments.
Welcome to the Funny in Failure podcast, a podcast that celebrates failure and shines the light on the emotional side of comedy, with yours truly, Michael Kahan.
Today's guest is a champion. Des is a brilliant storyteller and introspective. He has such great stories with a very unique life, moving to Ireland from America and attending boarding school. Challenges with addictions in his teens are just some of the many topics we chat about. It's also wild and amazing to hear his transformation over the years. This is a free-flowing, fun and funny conversation. This is a great balance between humor and depth. I really enjoyed this chat, and I could have spoken for much longer. Okay, let's get into it. Des Bishop is a stand-up comedian, writer, podcaster, and author. He has literally done it all, and he has a new stand-up special, of all people, and links are in the episode notes, and it is super funny. He has traveled and performed around the world. Believe it or not, he can speak fluent Mandarin. He's become a household name across the world. Des has also created and been in a few shows which are very unique, and I think he's won a couple of awards. His resume is far too long to read out loud, so check them out in the episode notes. But as you can imagine, we dive deep and we cover a lot, and we chat about his new comedy special, moving at 11 years old to boarding school in Ireland, grief and the loss of his father, crazy reviews, imposter syndrome, becoming the parent to your parents, rehab and addiction in his teens, finding his voice, plus plenty more. Before we get into this epic chat, in case you aren't aware, the videos are now available on YouTube under Michael Kahan. That's Kahan with a K, unless you're listening to it already. I'll still be posting snippets of these chats on Instagram under Funny in Failure, so check them out if you want to stay in the loop for upcoming episodes, or you want to ask a guest a question. I'd also love it if you would share the podcast or share your takeaways from the chat. It really motivates me, helps the podcast grow, and ensures I can lock in amazing guests like this one. And just as a final reminder, the podcast comes out at 3:30 Melbourne, Australian time, with the full video of the podcast to be released the following day. Okay, cool. Thank you. Let's get into it. Yeah, I'd love you to tell me if this is your career highlight. I believe you had a censor guy assigned to you when you were traveling in China, and you made him laugh during a stand-up set about a joke that probably should have been censored, and you made him laugh. Can you tell me, is this your career highlight and what was going on at the time?
I mean, I don't think it was a career highlight, but I mean, it wasn't just that I made him laugh about a joke that he should have censored, but I have him on camera laughing at a joke that and but he's just in a crowd shot, like nobody would know, but I know that it's Chen, and that is just that's the nature of China. It's basically like a heavily censored society officially, but most of the time everything's unofficial. But the joke was a very lighthearted parody of the Chinese Xinwen Lianbo is the Chinese evening news, which is like people complain about propaganda in the West, but they have no idea what real propaganda is like. So the Chinese evening news is like what you would expect propaganda to be, you know, like
excited.
From the textbook of propaganda. And the Chinese joke is always that the evening news is always the same. The government's working hard. The people, like the ordinary people, are happy, and the West is a mess. Right? So it's always like the last bit of news is always like bombs in Iraq and homeless people begging, and so I took the sting off of the, their like, dun, 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 their news, and I turned it into like a beat, and then I did a rap, a rap about it. Pretty basic joke, but actually, like the beat was actually kind of nice. So I have him on camera laughing at the joke that he's not meant to laugh at. And by the way, the hilarious thing is that all those performances that we did, those small stand-up comedy performances, which I know we're coming at this with a lack of context, but needless to say, this is a Mandarin stand-up show in Beijing, stand-up comedy. So this is not an English language show, Mandarin show, and none of them are actually legal. You're supposed to apply to the censor, but he never seemed to care. So maybe he was just considering that because it was part of our project that these shows were okay. I don't actually know, but again, that's just the nature of China. It's like there's all these rules, but you only need to follow them when somebody says it's time to follow it. And I think Chen made the executive decision that nothing that we were doing was problematic, which it really wasn't,
Can you imagine they get a copy of that video of him laughing and he's like, like, and he has to flee the country. I know no one will know, but you would have loved it in the edit. Did you notice that he was laughing at the time, or did you see the edit afterwards?
I wasn't that. I'd say I wasn't in the edit, so whenever I was sent it, I may have noticed at one stage, and I probably wouldn't have even clocked it at the beginning, like, oh, Chen really shouldn't be like laughing or on camera, but I don't think Chen would have ever seen it. I don't think they would have ever seen it. Like, they would never, like, that show, which is made for Irish TV and sold to SBS Australia, actually. The only other market that showed Breaking China, except SBS Australia had the library music. Yeah. For RTE, we have a blanket usage. So in the Irish version, it's way better because it has all this like awesome Chinese hip hop that we didn't have to get the rights to. But once you sell to SBS Australia, it's not covered under the same like blanket rights policy. Yeah. So I happened to be in Australia one time and I saw that it was on and I turned it on and I was like, wow, this is not the same. It's like all this just like generic like hip hop stuff, like library stuff that you can use. Anyway, what was I talking about there?
Well, I just love the fact that you were casually watching it in Australia. Oh, you just gather all of your friends and family. Like, oh, look what I just turned on in SBS. I guess we're not going to the footy here.
I was doing Melbourne. And it was on at that time, So, but no, I remember what I was saying, which was that like the show was not big enough. Like it would have only mattered. It would have only got flagged if like something went kind of viral or like there was like a New York Times article like Irish American comedian exposes something in China, and then it would have been a problem. But like this lighthearted show, which was actually, it definitely wasn't propaganda for China, but it was definitely propaganda for Chinese people. Like Chinese people come across great in the series because it's about them. That was the whole purpose of the show, is to be like, hey, outside of this dire framing of Chinese life that you get in the West, here's just Chinese people. And it was apolitical. It didn't have like a stance on that stuff. I have a stance on it, but the show was about humor and people and community. And so anyway, I'd say there was no, in fact, I think the Chinese ambassador in Ireland made like a public comment that he thought it was great advertisement for China. So yeah, I definitely was, some journalists would probably say, then you failed. But there's plenty of the expose stuff on China, but this was more of a connecting project,
I'll get into you and why you did it, but also like the average Chinese person, the average American person is a good person. Like that's politics and the government, which we won't talk about. And so it's nice to we're all about uniting here, but it's nice to just show like the average Chinese person, just the normal person who lives their normal life, and you're showing showing China in a different light as opposed to all the horrors that we see. That's important. And I know that wasn't necessarily the number one goal. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say that what's also important is that it's gotten way worse there since I left. So actually, like I was there right when Xi Jinping got into power, and it was the end of a kind of a steady sort of like loosening of all that stuff. Yep. And since he's come in, they've gone backwards. But as we know, the world is shifting towards flirting with authoritarianism more and more. So no surprises there.
We live in I am a very positive guy. We live in a wonderful world, and that's our official stance here.
but I'll just give context to everyone because I think I know you've spoken about this a lot, but I think it's so important because this has actually carried and helped your career. It's probably been like 10 years since you did that. But effectively, you wanted to do a show about you learning Chinese and living in China, right? And the goal was to perform stand-up at the end. Was that the purpose of the show?
Yeah. It was a sort of, I mean, it wasn't a spin-off, but it was certainly inspired by a show I did about learning the Irish language.
Yep.
But I had the separate desires that why I wanted to learn Mandarin. But I also, when I actually initially pitched the idea, it was 2008. It was the lead up to the Beijing Olympics, and there was a lot of international focus on China at the time. So I actually just thought this would be a good time to like show China. I'd been before, and I had seen how unique and interesting it was. So I just thought it'd be a good idea. But actually, I didn't get it off the ground until 2013 through various attempts at how to get it funded, how to get it made. We finally got it off the ground in 2013. So that the premise was a stand-up comedian goes to China for 1 year and tries to learn enough Mandarin to do stand-up in Mandarin. But I didn't know when I pitched it that there was a fledgling stand-up comedy scene brewing up. All that stuff I discovered when I got there. So that was kind of like luck in a way that I was able to join this like fledgling stand-up scene.
I think that's so awesome. And also just for context, you didn't actually know any Chinese whatsoever. I don't believe you got any Chinese members in your family. This was just a personal project for you. And I think that's so cool. We'll talk about how you've, incorporated in your stand-up since. But 5 years, I've got quite a few screenplays and I pitched a few shows. But the fact that you're waiting 5 years and you still pursued it, that is an inspiration to me and so many people. What did those 5 years look like? Was it something that was burning or were you waiting? Tell me what was going on.
Well, there's a lot that happens in this 5 years, so get ready.
I'm ready.
Well, no, the main thing that happens is so the Irish language project was very successful, but I think, the Irish economy absolutely fucking tanked. It was the global economic crisis, right?
Yep.
And so I had this Chinese idea on the back burner, but then I got involved in so the main thing is that my dad got sick in 2009. So when my dad got sick, everything shifted over. And actually in Melbourne, 2010 was when I began this journey of trying to develop a show about my dad, which then that became like all encompassing. And that was like really successful.
And you wrote a book on that, right, as well?
Made a documentary, wrote a book, got everything I could out of my dad's death. I dripped my father's death, but his illness too. The show was actually, he was alive. He was part of the show in the end. When I was doing it in Melbourne, actually, I didn't know that my dad was going to become part of the show. And also the poor Melbourne audiences didn't know that was going to be my show. It wasn't originally my intention. So all these people showed up and I'm like talking about my dad having cancer. And it was like pretty raw then. Anyway, that happened.
Sorry, just to give context, I assume, and sorry for interjecting, with the comedy festival, you have to put your application in months in advance. So you kind of like guess what your show's going to be. And then obviously the show had changed. So that's just context.
100%. So anyway.
That's wild as well.
So that was like a 2-year journey of the show, my dad actually dying, the documentary, and then the book. And that was just like all that, right? And that was great because my dad's death became this oddly like rewarding experience for all of us. The whole family was like involved, and that was fun. So then when the dust settled on that, I just this travel production company was like, hey, we want to do some travel stuff. We'd love to do something with you. And I was like, man, I'm not really into like travel stuff, but I had this idea that kind of went nowhere. And I said, any interest in trying to get this off the ground? And they said, yeah. And then it took them like a year and a half, but we did get it off the ground then. So it wasn't really like the 5 years the way you were saying it at the beginning. So that's what happened.
But still, there's a lot going on with your father. You've done a show on it. As you said, you milked his death for everything it's worth. I'm so glad that your dad could give that to you. But we're laughing. I know you've unpacked it, and to be able to laugh at it, I think is amazing. When you were doing a show like that, you didn't know what it was going to be. Was it cathartic for you? I know that wasn't necessarily your intention, but did you learn a lot about yourself and your interpersonal relationships? And
the show about my dad, you mean?
Yep.
Yeah. So actually, my dad had this horrific childhood, which I discovered like later in life.
Yeah.
Probably in my late 20s. and it was bad, like really bad, like heavy abuse. And his mother was actually sent to prison for the abuse, that the cruelty to children.
So to him,
And yes, and he was taken off his father because he was deemed to be unfit because he didn't protect them. And I have the article, I have the articles and everything. So, but I only got that after he died, the article bit. So anyway, so I actually always had this idea about a show about my dad based on this hook that in his modeling and acting days, long before I was born, he was a model and an actor in London, like in the 60s and early 70s. And I always had this idea of like making a show about how he always had regrets. I use this sort of, he didn't get James Bond as like a regret that he had, which is kind of true. The story got exaggerated and he wasn't seriously considered for James Bond, but he did genuinely have, like, they did come to look at him. And
that's a good looking guy.
My dad, if you see a picture of my father, you can see that he clearly could have been James Bond. So anyway, there was actually an article in like the Irish Post in London, which I didn't find until after my dad died. But there was just like, it was just like in the lore of my father that he had been considered for James Bond. So I always had this idea in my head of like a one-man show. Like definitely this one was going to be like out of the comedy. I know there's a lot of like misery comedy, which I've indulged in myself, but I was going to try to frame this one a little bit more in the Spalding Gray spoken word, spoken story category. Anyway, long story short, I could never figure out how to frame it. And then when he got sick, and because I remember I was lying in bed in my childhood bedroom in the house that I grew up in adulthood, writing down my Melbourne show for 2010. So this is like, this is like November of 2009. Nice. And I'm like thinking, fuck man, I gotta get the show together. And I start writing down like thoughts about what's been going on, And I remember exactly where I was, and I was like, oh shit, this is like, now I can do my dad was nearly James Bond, but I don't have to bring in the hero thing of what he survived. Because that was always the thing, is I wanted to give my father like a hero arc based on this, like his regret that he didn't become a fake superhero, but actually it's heroic that he raised a family after everything that he went through as a kid, that he raised a family in like a quiet, semi-suburban, like happy life.
Yeah. Good achievement.
That was the hero arc.
Yeah.
But it was like pretty fucking dark because I had to get into all this like heavy shit about his childhood, which is real.
I like that you're like smiling. So people like, not a lot of people would smile talking about this. I think that's great. It's been
a long time.
Yeah.
No, but anyway,
it's great.
But anyway, so then it was like when I was writing the jokes about, cancer and his attitude around it, that's when I was like, oh, now I'm going to tell my dad's story, but I'm going to tell it through the eyes of like coming towards the end and being aware what matters. And also the big thing in that show was talking about becoming the parent of your parents, because that was like at that time especially that was the initial phase of like finding out that he had cancer and treatment. And there was a real moment in life. No, I'm not talking about the show. I'm talking about like in life,
real life, yeah.
Which just passed actually. Not the anniversary of his death, but the New York Marathon was on TV when we were in the hospital.
Yeah, wow.
Waiting to find out what the fuck was wrong with my father. And we found out the day after the New York Marathon, but I remember being in that room watching the New York Marathon. So it's always like this time of year, because it was Halloween that we brought my dad into the hospital. But we found out on the Monday, and I came in the room to tell him actually, because we got pulled, myself and my mother got pulled to the side to be told like it's bad, the diagnosis is bad, and the prognosis is bad. So I was going back in to tell him, but somebody had told him in the interim. I guess, I don't know if that's how they do it. I don't know. But anyway, when I walked in, he knew. And he was like, not happy. I mean, like it was heavy. It was heavy jelly, man. It was
heavy jelly, of course. And it wasn't because the marathon was on? It wasn't because of how boring that is.
I'm laughing now through kind of like hiding a little bit of the emotion of it. But, he was on the bed, and he actually like put his head in my chest like a kid, And it was like, oh shit, like now I got to look after this guy. And I felt that, you know, like you got to be there for the guy. So
Yeah.
that was that was like part of that. What I tried, you know, what I felt, I like to separate the moment from the performance. It was a very profound moment in my life. It's
Of
like
course.
a switch that happens where suddenly you're like, oh shit, I now look after these people, right?
Yeah.
Becoming the parent of your parents. But that was also then part of the show. And I think part of what made that show so relatable to people is anyone who's had that moment knows. And I would have never known until it happened to me. So if it hasn't happened to you, it's interesting. It's like, oh yeah, I guess you do. You have this change. But then if you've been through it, then you're just like, bam, God, I remember that, you know? And it's not always like, it's not always nice. For some people, they have like resentments and they have to look after, you know, it can be complicated. For me and my father, it was like a beautiful transition, but it can be complicated for some people, you know?
Yeah, definitely. All relationships can be very complicated. And thank you for sharing that as well. And also, I love that you could show him in this light because I'm sure, and we don't need to get into it, you go as deep as you want. Having a childhood like that, there may have been resentment as well with how potentially he raised you, given how fucked up his childhood is. And then to see, you know, he kind of sacrificed or made sacrifices for you. And then to be able to give this show, which not only was funny and it did really well, I've been looking over when you did the show, but to like show your dad in this hero arc, I think that is beautiful. So good on you for actually doing that as well.
Yeah, and it's meant to be about that, like the heroics of fatherhood. I mean, the resentment part came more with my mother. I did a show about my mother later. That was like more complicated. But my dad with that stuff, it was a little bit easier. But the fun part for my dad was that, like, I got him involved. It was actually Jason Byrne. We were walking in Melbourne. I can't remember exactly where, but we were walking somewhere in Melbourne. And I think I had said to him, I was making some joke about like, you know, it'd be funny, like if my dad walked out at the end, you know? And he was like, you have to do that. Like, you have to find a way to get your father to come out at the end. And then we did that in Edinburgh. So that's what made the show awesome. The show was only okay in Melbourne, you know?
Is that
it
just
was
because
very
you had time to go over it? And
yeah, like it was raw as anything in Melbourne, but like I got a director. But the big thing is that like my dad, you know, you have that first round of chemo, which is always very successful with what he had, stage 4 small cell lung cancer. So he had a good outcome from the first round of chemo, which is basically prolonging life. And he was in reasonable shape in the summer, good enough shape to come and do the show in Edinburgh. And that really was that's like the showstopper, you know, like you're watching a show about this guy. He gets this hero storyline, and you kind of, you know, back then it was like you kind of expect when I say you know, ladies and gentlemen, my dad, that like he's going to be like on the screen, but he would pop out.
it's beautiful. I don't quite have the words for it. And not only would it have been beautiful for the audience, but for your relationship, knowing where he was at his life, to share that moment with him. I think I heard you say that he felt like he didn't have any regrets, or I forget what the word was, but that was very important for him as well.
He definitely had regrets, you know. So one of the things that motivated me to want to do this is because like I think he felt unfulfilled because
Yes,
he
I
had
did. Yeah.
yeah, he had a performer's like early adulthood, you know. He had been in some movies that like I cover all that in the show. Like he had a couple of lines in Day of the Triffids, which is like a B movie classic. He had one line in Zulu.
Oh,
And he had been in a couple of like TV ads. And like when I would visit my cousins in Ireland, you know, because my dad was like raised in Middleton, County Cork. And like, so when I would go to Middleton, County Cork, my cousins, my dad's uncles would be like, oh, you know, your dad used to be in the Blue Nun ad. And, you know, so like he had this like status that like his relatives thought it was really cool that he'd been on TV. But I feel like for him, he gave all that up in 1976 after I was born to be like a retail guy because he wanted to give us like a stable life. But he definitely at times, I think felt like a bit of a schmo, and he was like somebody he used to know would pop up on TV and he'd be like, "Oh, I used to work with that guy," or and it was just like, the eastern part of Flushing, Queens was a far cry from the Kings Road, Chelsea, and just the life that he had. And so there were times, and I'll give you another example of the evidence of it. Like when in my teens, my father spent a lot of time trying to write a musical, like a twee Irish immigrant, like epic musical, which actually it wasn't great, but the effort was no, I mean, like it just honestly, like it just,
Yeah.
but the effort was there, and the desire to be creative was there, and so like you could see that it was in him, but he had 3 kids to raise, and he was like, working in the end, he worked for Burberry, the clothing company, and it's fine. We had a great life, but without a shadow of a doubt, my dad had regrets. So, but as a result, he was very supportive of me being a stand-up, and being back in Ireland was a big deal for my dad. There's a lot of stuff about my life that was like nice for my dad. But anyway, I wanted to just give him one last, crack at the whip of like performance, So that was fun. But I think for him, because all that stuff fits nicely into like a narrative.
Yep.
But I think if you were to grill him posthumously, he would probably say for him it wasn't about getting back on stage. For him, it was just like us doing something together at the end.
Yeah.
I think that's what
beautiful.
he loved. Yeah, I think that's what and the fact that like it took the misery out of what was essentially like the fucking dead man walking part of his life. It took the misery out of that and actually gave it like a purpose.
There's so many things. One, it's beautiful that you could share that. 2, to also distract him and to bond with his son, but also the regret side. And I think that's really interesting. I had this lady on this podcast, Bronnie Ware, and she's a international best-selling author. And I think it's called The Top Regrets of the Dying. And essentially, palliative care nurse, she would interview people just before they're about to pass and ask them, like, what are your top regrets? And the number one regret was, I wish I lived the life that I wanted to live and not the life I thought others wanted me to live. And it's just a book about regrets. And it's very impactful for me. I read it, I got her on, and hearing a story like that as well, not only is it beautiful that you were able to share this moment, but to also, understand that side, the regret side. So I'm sure you would have grown not only as a performer in that moment, but also about like living your life, because you live a very different life compared to the average person. So you're smiling. What springs to mind?
Oh, no, I'm just listening. So I was just reacting and listening.
Oh,
No, so what I was smiling about was because you talk about regrets, and like we used to catch my father all the time. Like, he'd just be sitting there, like, and then suddenly he'd just be like, like you could see he was having a conversation with himself.
yeah.
But I inherited it because sometimes Hannah goes, "What?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I was just thinking about a shitty audition I did fucking 7 years ago." It's
Yeah,
like, it's just
fair.
some stupid thing kicks into the head.
Oh, we all a product of our parents to a degree. So did you learn did it kind of give you more clarity? Because one, he was very supportive of you, and to live your life, you've got a very interesting life, and we've only just touched the surface. But was it kind of cathartic in that sense as well, to realize, you're on your right path?
I mean, honestly, the thing that really like was overwhelming me was like, I was like, damn, I gotta have a kid. That's because like all that mattered to my dad at the end was his family, So at the time I was very broody. I don't know if they use that term in Australia, but I was just like very like feeling like I should have a kid. But that passed from spending time with my friends and their kids. I was like, fuck this.
Well, you're going to say your wife. That's even
Fuck
better.
this, man. Fuck this. Yeah. Now I have a joke in my current show. It's like people say, "Oh, you got to have a kid. You don't want to die alone." And I'm like, the dying is only a very short period of time. but I did experience it profoundly with my father, especially. That my dad. The thing. So here's the thing. Like life is just luck, and cancer is bad luck. But the thing about cancer is like it gives you like this timeline. Gives you like this like, hey, get your affairs in order, like particularly your emotional affairs. Yep. So we had this just like very clear timeline that my father followed. Like health wise, my father like followed the script almost to like line for line perfect, the amount of time, when he would be good, when he would be bad. And we were able to just fit into that schedule, and everything got done that needed to be done. Like my mother wasn't the same. Like she was sick, then she wasn't sick. And it was just like a lot of chaos, like not sure what was wrong with her. So within the chaos, you don't get the same journey, the same arc. So it helped me to realize that like what we had with my dad was just pure luck, you know? And it was nice to be able to have that. But like, I'd say it's the rarer experience actually, because people die suddenly, you know, people die like fucking like it's just torture from start to finish, the suffering they go through, you know. So, you know, I can't remember what the beginning of this thought was, but basically what we had with my dad was just very lucky, and I'm now aware of that.
I'll slightly shift gears, but I just want to reiterate, I think it's so nice that in that moment he's not feeling great, that you had this special moment with him. It's a part of, you know, your history as well. You made a lot of people laugh, a lot of people aware of this show. And, you know, you talk about a lot of topics that we've discussed. I think that's really awesome. And I'm glad within a horrible experience that you could kind of, you know, laugh, a lot of probably crying as well, but to have that special moment, I think that's also credit to you as well. Forget about all the luck stuff. It was like you and how you showed up given the circumstance as well. That's my,
yeah. I appreciate your take.
And then I want to go on a slightly, well, I want to hear your take on this. I know a lot of comedians say they don't read reviews. And I know that you got a 5-star review on this show, and then someone else gave you in The Guardian, which is a big deal apparently in the stand-up world. And then someone gave you a 2 or 3-star review. I want a 2-star review. Can you tell me a bit about this? Then I got a gazillion questions about it.
Well, first of all, the 5-star review was a huge deal because my dad got very excited about that. Nice. And a guy that he hadn't talked to in like a long time, an English guy, called him and said, "Is that your son getting a 5-star review in The Guardian?" So that was great. The 2-star guy, whatever. I mean, I don't think about him much, but his name is Stephen Armstrong. just kidding. But no.
He lives at What Avenue in.
The 2-star review, the issue with the 2-star review is that he said, and here's the difficult part, this show would have gotten at least 3 stars if it hadn't been for the surprise ending, which I thought was inappropriate.
Wild.
No, it just so happens that I can quote that word for word. But anyway, it was so... First of all, this is why you don't read reviews, is because you don't need to get involved in the emotion of somebody's opinion, because he has every right to give that opinion. You know what I mean? Like, he has every right to say that he thought my dad walking out at the end and getting a standing ovation was inappropriate, right?
That's so crazy when you spell it out like that.
But obviously, I have every right to be like, that's insane. And you've got some issues with your father that are unresolved, and you shouldn't be taking that out on me. Now, it also has to point out that this was in like the Sunday Times, and it was actually, there was 5 reviews, I think, and they were all about shows that had to do with fatherhood, because it just so happened that me, Russell Kane, Greg Davies, you know, Greg Davies from British Taskmaster and from the In-Betweeners, all had shows about their dads for whatever reason. There was 2 other ones too, but I can't remember which ones. Yeah. And so I guess it was part of this thing of like, what are the differences? And who knows? There's a lot of politics. You know, this guy, he was actually on the Comedy Award committee. So who knows? You know, Russell Kane got nominated. I didn't. I was actually the favorite to be nominated. And I actually, like, none of that shit matters now, but like, who knows if he was motivated to, like, you know, sully my one because of the, you know, because he wanted another. I have no idea. But anyway, the thing that was annoying to me, which is it's so fatherhood related, is he punishes me. It's very rare in a review that somebody will say, this would have been better, except, right? Yeah. So I'm taking stars away. Literally, the thing from childhood that you do, it's like, oh, you're going to get a gold star today for your performance. He takes stars away. Says maybe it would have been more than 3. I'm giving him 2, but it would have been at least 3 if I hadn't brought out my dad for what was literally like one of the great talking points of the Edinburgh Fringe 2010, because he thought it was inappropriate. And the concept of appropriateness, British people, and the nonsense of all that, it's just very loaded. In a show that was pretty deep, I think you're allowed to say that you're having a very deep, and perhaps you're too, I don't think this guy is dumb, but I think he might have been like
In it.
not self-aware enough to see that he's actually reacting in a way that like relates back to his own childhood. He's taking stars away from me because of what is appropriate or not. And I know, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he was probably saying, the show was very deep and meaningful and sentimental, and that my dad coming out was a bit of a gimmick, but like, I mean, he was the only one that had that reaction. So he was the outlier. It was like across the board, like great reviews. So I loved it. I loved the fact that his dad issues were so pronounced that he had to punish me for bringing out my dying father. I mean, how cold and callous do you have to be?
One, I love that you remember it in the sense we'll get to it, but this moment with your father, people are loving it, and then this guy that clearly you've shown him a mirror and it doesn't go well. But just for the record, how heartless do you have to be, right? In a show, by the way, that he would have seen and people would have been clearly loving it. How heartless do you have to be to not say, hey, maybe I'll just give it a bad review, but I won't like shit on the dying guy coming out. It seems very clear that it's his own personal triggers.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
I agree. But, we've spoken at length on this podcast, whether it's with comedians or actors, about kind of like the gatekeepers. And I know that there have been people that would have won awards at the Melbourne Comedy Festival or other awards, but then politics come into play. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the game. And I'm sure this is not the only example that or maybe it is, but how do you kind of move forward with that? Because I know that we're like making jokes and it would have been very frustrating. It's a special moment with your dad and also the audience. The audience is growing and laughing and learning along the way. How do you move forward with just negative reviews and stuff? Do you still read them? What's the relationship now?
I mean, these days I don't read them. I tell the public. Well, actually, the more important thing is they don't matter anymore. Yeah. That's actually the big thing because of social media. Yeah, like back then, like that 5-star review in The Guardian, like sold a gazillion tickets.
Oh, no, that's good for you.
Those days are kind of over. I remember like if you got a good review in The Age, like that was everything. Now it's just like social media, viral videos. Most of the shows, I mean, I think there's still word of mouth, and I think some reviews matter a bit, but they just don't matter like they used to.
I don't ever read reviews. I've never read a review and go, I'm not going to see or see that comedian now, but I know it was different.
But I also read reviews about restaurants I want to go to, movies that I want to see. So like I don't think that reviews are pointless, right? Like, but what I do think is that you should not read them because other people's opinions of your show are not relevant. And the problem is that sometimes they'll say things because, like, again, like this guy, he was obviously having a moment. If I read that and I say, "Oh shit, maybe I shouldn't bring my dad out," like I've let that guy get into my head. So it's just so much easier to not read the reviews because they're not your director, they're not in your trusted circle, and they're entitled to their opinion, So like I've no problem with reviews, the culture of it, but I also think that when comedians get upset about reviews, like I got upset about that one, but that was quite a unique scenario.
Yeah.
But if you get upset about reviews, it's only because you read them. And I have the same opinion about comments, and I'm very rigid. Like everybody I know that blows up in the industry, and even before they blow up, I tell them that the most important thing is to not read comments. Like because the minute you read shit about yourself, it's going to get in your head and it affects your performance. And I think it's
Very
the same
true.
for sporting people. And I think that, even though sometimes it's like, I'm going to show them as a good motivator, a lot of time it's not, like it's an added pressure that you don't need. And like most people are commenting, and but not most reviewers, but a lot of reviewers they're coming off their own crap when they're writing, and you don't need to take that on. But once you read it, I promise you'll be taking it on. You have to have a strong mental focus to not take on the shit that people say about you.
I agree, and also the proof's kind of in the pudding for the level of comedy that you're at. If you were to listen to everyone, you wouldn't get to that level. And you said something really important: a trusted circle. So have you had to be more mindful of who you collate ideas with, or has that come kind of naturally to you?
No, I mean just like in terms of like a particular project. Like some projects I don't liaise with anybody because it's just like stand up and it's me and the audience. So the audience is my trusted circle because it's like what's working, what's not. That's like the show I'm doing now, which is just bits. They're not meaningless bits, but like there's no narrative structure, just trying to make people laugh, and I love that. But there are certain shows that are just a bit more like a process of development, and then that will be whoever's involved. Like my dad was nearly James Bond, had a director, for example. The show I did about my mother, it was just, a lot of like trial and error, and having some people look at it, but the comments are definitely outside of my trusted circle.
So it's very interesting because
The comments are damaging.
Say that again.
The comments are damaging.
Yes, but it's interesting. So, for example, and I'm not going to suck up to you too much, but your latest special, for example, hilarious. Also, I love your energy in that. And we'll talk about it in a second. But I watched the first 20 minutes on 1.25, and I'm like, you're unusually, I mean, not unusually, you're extra. It worked. It actually worked. I don't know why I was on 1.25, but it worked with your high energy. I'm like, oh, Des has gone to another level. And then I realized then it still holds up. So people can watch your special in quick time. It worked really well.
I mean, I speak pretty fast in that special. I don't know how the hell you watch on 1.25. I'd say some people thought they were on 1.25 when they were fucking watching it.
It worked. I found it very funny. But for example, I didn't read the comments, but sometimes it has the one comment pop up and it changes. They're all lovely. They're all saying how funny you are and this is great set, tight set, which is true. But there is that one comment. I haven't seen it, but there will be that one comment out of the 1,000 nice ones. And that's kind of like the nature of the game. And we can focus on the negative one, but we can neglect the thousands of people that have liked your comedy as well.
100%.
Yeah.
But actually, I was pretty happy with the comments on that special. People started to say to me, man, the comments are like so positive on the special. So of course, people keep telling you they're good. I did have a peek at those, but I was happy. When there's an overwhelming, like when you can tell that the comments are like saying that this is good, then you kind of like, then you're just confident. The comments from that I can see from the clips on the videos. Because the thing about Instagram is that like Instagram, like it's hard sometimes not to see comments, but there'll always be one like consistent negative comment that people go on. So the one on that one is that he's copying Bill Burr, which I find very entertaining.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I can
which is
sort
funny.
of see that, but there's definitely
Yeah, well, you can see how people in America would see that they don't know who I am, and they because I'm inspired by black comics. It's funny. It's just like they're still seeing a middle-aged white guy. I'm like, in my mind, I'm fucking Richard Pryor, but they're still seeing a middle-aged white guy. But the funny thing about the Bill Burr comments is that you get Irish people then under the Bill Burr comment being like, maybe Bill Burr's copying him. We've been watching him for 25 years. Because a lot of these people, they see it and they've never heard of me, so they're just like, wow, this guy really reminds me of Bill Burr. So it's quite funny.
I take that as a compliment because he's very well. And also for people that might not know, and you're a modest guy, like you are huge in Ireland. And so I like that you've got your fans rallying behind you. I want to know actually about the move. We'll talk a bit. Yeah, the move. You're in Ireland. We'll talk about your upbringing there and how you got there. But you're in Ireland. You hit at a very high level. I think you've described yourself as like one of the more famous people in Ireland. How was the move to America? Was that scary? Did you have to like start over again? Did you get slots? Was it a hard move?
Actually, I never actually moved to America. It's funny because I didn't come here with my family to Ireland, right? You aware of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was always in Ireland on my own. So I was always going back to the fam, That's the other my life is so complicated. It's like, how the fuck are we gonna get all this into one podcast? But anyway,
Yeah.
I was always going back to the States. So when I finished in China, so I liked China so much that I stayed an extra year because I'm like, yo, I just learned Mandarin. I'm doing stand-up in Mandarin. I'm not leaving now. I'm gonna use this. So I went back to being a regular international comedian, but I happened to be living in Beijing for all of 2014. So when that was finished, I was like, wait a minute. So now I'm performing in English to people from all over the world about my time in China. I'm performing in Mandarin to Chinese people about my time in China. I can't just go back to just doing stand-up in Ireland. And this is not a diss on Ireland, but it's just like, I got more to say and do than just the Irish part of my career, which had been, successful, but also like pretty much the majority of what I've done, other than some of the things we've talked about.
And get new experiences.
Yeah. So I was like, I said I would start to do more stuff in New York. It did also coincide with my mother beginning her illness journey. So that actually started when I was still living in China. So I had to take an emergency trip back to China, and I was in the midst of some emergency trips back and forth. Now my mother actually got stable again after that, but that began like needing to be in the States more. So it was all like finishing in China, my mother being sick. So I just said I would spend more time in New York. I wasn't moving back, quote unquote. But it just so happened that I got passed, if you hear these American comics talk about being passed at the Comedy Cellar, I got passed at the Comedy Cellar in like 2010 when my dad was sick, and my agent at the time got me a spot at the Cellar. I went into the Cellar, ripped it, got the pass, which I did not know was a thing. I just thought I was doing a spot, and then she told me how to get more spots. Esty, the famous Esty, and but I didn't know that was like a thing. So when I never asked for a spot again. I just wasn't living there, so I was just like, awesome. The Cellar's great. So then when I came late 2015. I just emailed her and I was like, oh, hey, I don't know if you remember, but I did a spot back in 2010. You told me to email you on a Sunday if I have spots for that week. Is that still the same system? And she was like, yeah. So I sent in an email. Cool. I get a ton of spots, and then everyone's like, when did you get passed? And I was like, what? And they were like, when did you get passed? And I was like, I don't know. I did a spot here in like 2010. I had no idea that it was this like rite of passage in New York comedy. So the transition into doing more spots in New York was pretty smooth because of that. And, over the years, comedy festivals, I knew plenty of people, and the industry, I was not like the industry knew who I was. Like not everybody, but like plenty of people were like, oh, that guy. Yeah. He's an American guy, big in Ireland, blah, blah, blah. So that was just like, I was going back and forth from Ireland in those days. So the move didn't happen until the pandemic, which I hadn't intended to move back to New York more. But I met my now wife, who we met in the pandemic. And by the time society had opened back up, I was engaged. So that was really why I did the move,
Yeah, that's a really interesting way. Like I had, I'm not sure if you know him, Monty Franklin. He's big in.
I know him.
Yeah, he's big in LA, and he was building up to be one of the biggest comedians probably here, and also doing acting. And he talks about the exact opposite experience to you, where he couldn't get spots, even though he had like a good tight 5, 10, 15, 20. And so he just had to go to the comedy store and just show his face. And so then after 2 years, they slowly started to give him spots. Then we hear a system where they give you a pass in New York. That's so interesting. I didn't know that it worked like that. No one's ever told me that.
Yeah, but I think the store is like that too. He was just waiting to get passed. But it's harder in LA. It's definitely harder. I don't even know their systems. I haven't really. I've done my own show in like improvs there, but I've never tried to get involved in the LA thing. But it's definitely more complicated there, without a shadow of a doubt.
That is bizarre. I like how you just naively get it, and then you're like, "Yeah, I'm just performing here." Good for you. It also shows, obviously, your stand-up is at a high level. But was it interesting, being in Ireland, everyone knows who you are, and then when you're going to America, not as many people are going to know you. Did that kind of change how you do comedy? Because you've mentioned that America is the best thing for your stand-up long term.
Yeah, but I mean, that wasn't the first time I had that experience, because I had that when I went to Edinburgh, I had that when I did gigs in the UK, and I definitely had that when I was in Australia, So I had that experience, but what I didn't have was a more like extended period of time to get comfortable in a place. So for me, it was less about people not knowing who I was and more just the kind of atmosphere of the New York, particularly comedy clubs. Not that it's more like in your face, but it's just, I don't know, it's just a different energy. And it's 15-minute spots where you could just do a load of them. And it was just like, it felt more like going back to the beginning of my career, which is funny because all the best comics in the world are still doing that also. I'm sitting there like chatting with Chris Rock. I mean, I knew Louis C.K. from before because he used to come to Ireland a lot, but sitting there with Chris Rock, Louis C.K., Ray Romano, they're sitting at the table waiting to do their spots. They're still doing spots in the city, working on their stuff. And so you're just in that atmosphere of like, I got to go out here and kill it night, show after show, night after night to audiences that have never seen you before. So actually, it was just like invigorating, rejuvenating.
Cool.
It's exciting. Plus, you can bring back older bits, repurpose them for American audiences. So it just honestly, it just sharpens everything up. And for somebody like me, and say anybody over the last 25, 30 years that has gone to like comedy festivals in the UK or Australia, there's a storytelling atmosphere that is pervasive at those festivals. And I've loved that and I've thrived in it, but it has certain limitations in like a club, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but like if you get too used to that, you do have the crutch of hiding behind a narrative. And this isn't a criticism of anybody doing it. I'm talking about my own experience of like, there's some shortcuts with a narrative structure with jokes, and you just, because like a story is so satisfying, people don't care if it takes a while to get to the punchline,
Yeah.
and that's okay. In fact, sometimes a punchline can take you out of the story. So it's almost like at times in a certain type of show, they're like an enemy. There's like a time and a place for them, and sometimes they're like a distraction from like really like experiencing what the story is trying to say. So not having that at all, because the New York comedy clubs are the antithesis of that. It's like you don't have time to establish anything.
Yeah.
For me, that was a good exercise because I needed that. I definitely lived in a world where I had not flexed that muscle for a very, very long time. I was doing my own shows, my own tours on stage with my audience. So it was really good. It was like getting a personal trainer that was like, listen, everything you've done before was wrong. You're not fit, and now we're going to get you fit. Like it's like the first time you go to a trainer and they're like, listen, you have no core.
You suck.
You think you're fit, but you have no core strength. And then you start doing all these exercises. You're like, what the fuck is this? And then the next day you can't move because you're so fucking sore. You're like, what? It's like the first time you go on a reformist Pilates machine. Like, you're like, this is bullshit. And then the next day you're like, why can I not move? Because you worked a muscle that you haven't worked since you were 3 months old. So anyway,
True.
It was very good for like unlocking that part of me. So like when you're talking about this rapid fire energy in that show that you see, that comes from that. But there is a cheat code on that special, which is I am doing some bits, not all, but a lot of those bits are bits of mine from the last 15, 20 years that got reinvigorated by the New York and American stand-up comedy world. So actually, I'm kind of dumping. Essentially, every one of those bits are like closers of mine.
Oh,
Like
yeah, I could tell. Yeah. Like
bits that I've closed
bam,
on.
bam.
So that's why it has like an end of show energy throughout the whole show,
Nice.
you know? And I don't know if I'll ever be able to achieve that again. I would have preferred if I'd been able to put that on Netflix, but what are you going to do?
Well, you never know. One, it could. And two, I wouldn't say it's a cheat. I just say that's credit to you doing the work and refining. Also, I don't think you realize, and I know you're humble, that mindset is what makes makes a bad comedian to a good comedian. Is that actually I've said that wrong. You could have just gone to Ireland, you could have stayed in Australia, but you realized that there was this muscle that you could have worked on and you worked at it. You realized that perhaps you weren't as refined in this area and you worked hard and you allowed it to be the best experience for your comedy ever. Not many people would do that. A lot of people might be like, oh, I've got weaknesses. I've been doing this for so long. I only want to work on my strengths. But you're smiling and you're excited, like you want it to get better. Very rare. A lot of people, once they've got like fame or success, they just want to keep it. They don't want to lose it and they come from fear.
Yeah, but what I will say is that it wasn't a conscious decision. It's what happened because of my desire to just do more in the States. I wasn't specifically thinking like, oh, I'm going to get better. And also, I think that we need to,
would have because you made that decision.
yeah, but I do want to add a caveat. My family has always had a small beach bungalow across the street from the ocean in West Hampton Beach, Long Island. And part of the motivation for spending more time is the summers. Being able to go to that house in the summer was also part of the attraction. So yes, I was happy to get better at stand-up, but I also hated the Irish summers. And so there was a little bit of a push factor of why am I spending my summers in Ireland when I have this house with my brothers that I can go to. So I do want to add that. So it wasn't all about like, I want to be the best comedian I could be. It was also, I'd like to play beach volleyball.
True, and I'm surprised
on a
Ireland
Tuesday
even has summers. It's probably raining every day there. When you market yourself, when you're in Ireland, are you the American Irish comedian, the Irish comedian, Irish American comedian? Was there like branding on what you are first? Because when you're in Ireland, they thought you're American, but when you were in America, you would have like played more to the island side. Was that ever like a identity crisis or a branding thing in the comedy space?
I mean, outside of Ireland, it's always been a problem because in Ireland, it's very clear. I'm like American, but I'm not, they know who I am. I'm like a product of the diaspora, come back, observing Irish society through slightly unique eyes, even though I've been here since I'm 14, right? And, largely they accept me as kind of Irish, but that's always a thing in Ireland. That's fine. I know what I am in Ireland, but outside of Ireland, it was always an issue, right? Because I have an Irish comedy career, but I present like very American, and one of the great things about being in the States is it took me a while to figure this out, and I never figured it out in the times where I would just leave Ireland for a short time and come back, say pre-2015. I never figured out who I was on stage outside of like shows that had a clear story, But what I discovered, and I finally had to accept it, was that
You're Bill Burr.
I'm joking. But you know what though? It's kind of true in that I'm actually not inspired by Bill Burr. But what I did have to accept was I'm a guy from Queens to these people. There's just no point in trying to explain to them because once the explanation is done, all they're hearing and all they're seeing is a guy from Queens.
That's
and
why you should
that's
do
what
Chinese or speak Gaelic or put on the Irish accent.
But all those bits work, but they work once I just accept who I am, and that's totally fine. And that's actually was quite liberating for me when I was just like, you know what, there's just no point. It's almost like I had to just like compartmentalize essentially 2/3 of my life to the American audiences. And obviously every now and then it shows up in my bits because I always established that I lived in Ireland for a lot of my life. And there will be bits where it makes sense and I reference it. But as far as like who I am on stage, like I'm just a guy from Queens. And that is what I am, So like once I kind of like embrace that, actually a lot more material started just like
was like
flowing.
Like a switch happened? Was it?
Yeah, just stuff started like flowing out of me. I just was able to just have the
Cool.
opinions, and it wasn't like I was trying to pretend to be somebody else. It was just
No.
like, oh, this is who these people see, this is who these people hear, and this is kind of who you are. I mean, it was fun to be able to just be that guy, because obviously I had to turn off parts of that from a lot of my career, because you're that's like specifically American shit. But now it's like, now I go back a little further in the earlier parts of my childhood, references, things like that. Now this is not like a perfect science. None of this really stands up that people can, but what about this? What about this? There's obviously parts of me that are clearly from that hybrid life that also come out, but there was just something that it opened me up to something else. I don't know how to explain it other than something, a switch flicked.
I think that's amazing. It's like when you feel, whether it's subconscious or conscious, there's this part. And then when you kind of embrace it and you get this flow and a new lease on life, we all have that, whether it's in all fields of life, whether it's like career or with relationships, when you just kind of embrace that thing that that's there. And it can be like 1%. It generally allows for good or flow or whatever you want to call it.
My bigger problem now, though, is that my energy, which I sort of allude to in that special that you watch, but like it really is like an issue, is that like my energy doesn't correspond with like my so, so
I don't know how that relates whatsoever, but from a viewer point of view, I love the energy that you bring. And I'm not just talking about that stand-up. I've seen it over the years. You've also been to Australia. I've seen your bits as well over the years. I love it. But we won't get into politics yet, but I think that's I love your style. And I'm glad that you found that. We've alluded to this a lot, but we probably won't have time to do the whole story, but you moving to Ireland is crazy. You move when you're 14, you flunk, you're giving me a look. What's wrong?
No, I'm just, it's so funny because you're responding to my facial expressions, and I have like a very expressive face, and every personal trainer I've ever had, every physical therapist, because I tore my ACL this year, so I've been to numerous physical therapists, and they always stop and say, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "Oh no." So
I'm just listening.
Your reaction, I'm just like an expressive face.
I like that. I'm like that stereotypical worried girlfriend. What's wrong? What's wrong? Are you okay? I just wanted you to have a good time. Actually, I'll get into the island thing. You did your ACL. Were you able to perform on that? Because I know you did it snowboarding, and the way that you've described, I'm sorry, I'm laughing, sounds absolutely horrific. Have you been able to do much on it? Because you stand up, you're standing up.
Yeah. Well, no, I was skiing, I tore my ACL in Aspen. So actually, I didn't get on stage. And so I tore it in February and I had to cancel a few shows. Actually, the big thing I had to cancel was Melbourne. So actually, I was supposed to do the Melbourne Comedy Festival. So I had to cancel that, which was bad. The only good news was
that's right. I was looking. Yes. Okay. No. Yeah.
Yeah. So the only good news about that was that it was just one huge block of time that I canceled that one festival, and now I've bought myself like 6 weeks to get surgery, and so I got back on stage like the first week of May. So essentially, I took 2 months off. I probably could have done shows a little earlier, but my overriding memory was that when I got back on stage, my right glute, because I was fucking on my right leg the whole show, my right glute was on fire for the first couple of shows.
Because you're just like trying to...
you're standing for so long. Yeah. But anyway, in the end, it was fine, So yeah, no, that was it. That was just, it was annoying for Melbourne, and it was annoying because the special came out, and then I kind of I didn't do the proper promo for the special at the time because I was just like so distracted and like 1,000 things were going on. I just didn't care.
Sure. Did you use that period? Was it a good rest for you, or you're like, damn it, I just wanted to get up on stage?
I was fucking depressed, man. But I wasn't depressed about getting up on stage. It's just like I've had a bad run of injuries. I got like a hip, not a hip replacement, but I got like a surgery on my hip 2.5 years ago because I was having like problems with my groin, and that surgery actually didn't work. But anyway, I recovered from that fine, but again, big recovery. Then the following year when I was getting back in the game, I tore my fucking calf playing paddle, bad tear.
Paddle?
So paddle, it's like a new, anyway, it doesn't matter. You can Google it afterwards. Those that know, and those that don't know, don't need to know. Yep. So, but it's like a tennis type game. And then, so then I recovered from that all the summer of 2023, and then 2024, I was back skiing. I'm like getting fit, and I tore my fucking ACL. So summer 2024, I was rehab. So I've actually had 3 summers in a row where I was rehabbing from injuries. And actually, summer of 2022, I was just trying to recover from whatever the fuck was going on with my groin. So I'm now like, I'm 4 summers deep in rehab. So to be honest with you, my only feeling after I tore my ACL was not depression, like, oh, I'm depressed, but just like very on the understandable pity pot about just how much bad luck I've had. And I know there's elements of just not accepting my age, but
I disagree. I've seen plenty of people. First of all, you're in great shape, but I've seen plenty of people in their 70s and 80s live that life. I don't necessarily buy into that 100%.
No, I know, but what I mean is like you get to a certain age where there's just certain things that you have to just look after yourself a lot more if you want to train to that intensity. So if you keep getting injured, it's probably a sign that like you're doing something wrong or you're doing too much. And so anyway, the tearing my ACL was just unlucky. I just had a very bad ski fall. Some people are like, you can't be skiing, but like obviously like people ski their whole lives and it's fine. So anyway, whatever. Bad fall though, bad tear. And actually my recovery has been kind of slow. I'm a little bit behind. But anyway, we won't get bogged down in injuries, but they have been the bane of my existence for the last 4 years.
Okay, we are putting it out there to the universe that this will be the best experience of your life, like everything else, and you're gonna be doing skiing marathons in the summer of Ireland, which will probably be snowing there.
Well, no, the one thing Ireland doesn't get is a lot of snow.
Oh, I'm actually surprised by that.
Yeah,
I just want to tie up the island arc of your very, very, very interesting life, where you're 14, you flunk out of school. As kind of sort of a joke, you moved to Ireland. I think a cousin suggested you should move to Ireland to go to boarding school. You had, your words, a lot of issues there. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because you were drinking and you've been drinking and drugs at such a young age and you've stopped since. So I want to just get a bit of a snapshot and then I'll berate you with 1,000 questions.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. When I was 14, I flunked out of school, which is kind of like large. Like, honestly, if it was today, like I was actually like dealing with a little bit of bullying, you know, we didn't call it bullying then, but you know, it was like I was actually 2 different groups. Like one group outside of my high school, which was like old friends of mine, they kind of turned on me. And then this group in school turned on me. The one in the school had to do with the fact that one of the guys liked the girl that I ended up going out with. And so he just got all his cronies, because they had no connection to me. We were all freshmen, but they had all come in together. And I didn't really have like a core group of guys that I came in there with. So that group kind of turned on me and like were sort of quietly sort of like threatening me. Wow. And well, the joke is that one of the guys in that group was the son of John Gotti, right? So that's true. But like I don't talk about it too much anymore, because like now that I'm doing more shit in the States, like this is in Australia.
Is that a mafia person?
John Gotti was the head of the Gambino crime family.
I knew I heard that.
At the time, he was the guy.
Oh.
Yeah.
You have to take those punches then. You just go, you're right.
Yeah. So anyway, if you met this kid, he would not remember this, because he was just having his name used by this other kid. But this other kid was in with them. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. It's all water under the bridge now, but it's pretty frightening at the time. Yep. But of course, you know, back then, like, you don't, like, I wasn't even like telling people, you know, like I don't even think a lot of people were even aware of this. And so, you know, it finally got dealt with. My mother called the school and it got like dealt with in like a subtle way. And, you know, it ended up not being a problem, but it was like embarrassing. And so I was struggling that first year. I had my own issues. I was drinking a lot and I was doing a lot of graffiti, you know, because that was like the thing at the time. It was like suddenly like all kids my age doing graffiti in these like bullshit little gangs. They weren't like, we're not talking about like the Bloods and the Crips, but like there was like these like little gangs from our neighborhood. It doesn't matter. It was just like a moment in time. And, you know, I was just very attracted to anything like troublesome. And so when I flunked out of school, my mother had already caught me drinking twice. And so she was just freaking out. You know, her own childhood, her parents were terrible alcoholics. My mother had like severe fear of alcoholism. My dad was sober, alcoholic, and my cousin had like really had some problems, my older cousin. So my mother was like freaking out. And she prone to a bit of anxiety, which of course we didn't know at the time. So in the midst of all the chaos of like my mother and my father severely worried about where I was going to end up. My cousin threw out the suggestion to me, and I was like, "Fuck yeah," because I was quite happy to get out of there. I was not happy at that time, you know.
And did you know that, or you just knew you needed a change?
No, I didn't know that. It's all like like in that, like when it came up, I was like, "Yeah, let's get the fuck out of here." And but it was also like not a serious thing at the beginning. It just caught an energy very quickly. Like it wasn't like a thought that anybody had before my cousin suggested this. And my mother and father didn't take it very seriously at the start, but it was just that her dad, my cousin's father, who was like through marriage, was my dad's cousin. Like so it was actually her mother was my dad's first cousin. So he just like kind of got the ball rolling like very efficiently. And 6 weeks later, I was in Ireland. Like it was really that quick. So it's like a life-changing moment, you know?
Isn't it wild? Your life would be very different if you didn't take it up. Do you ever think about what your life would have been if you didn't take that opportunity? Because you've described it as the best thing that happened to you at the time.
Yeah, I mean, you can never know, right? Because like obviously my brothers didn't go, and whatever small influence me going to Ireland had on them, other than that, they had a totally like normal American life. I always think like my middle brother is a teacher, and I always think I would probably be a history teacher now, and I'd be quite happy. But I also don't know, you know. I liked performing, so maybe if I stayed in New York, I would have actually got involved in the drama society there, or you know, who knows? You just never know. You can't know, you know.
That's true.
But you know, obviously I wouldn't be the type of comedian I am today because I'm very influenced by those early years of being able to observe Irish society. So honestly, we literally, or I could be dead. You know, I could have ended up. So my mother, one of my mother's takes, you know, because like sometimes my mother gets a little bit of pushback on like what were you thinking with sending him there? So
Yeah.
her take at the time was because she was just a panic merchant, you know. So she just thought that I was definitely going to have problems with alcohol, right? Because that was her fear. My mother's whole life is framed by her parents being severe alcoholics.
So that like
she just lived in perpetual fear of alcoholism and all the stress that is associated with that. So in her mind, it was like, well, it'll be safer for me to go through it there. And you know, on some level, she was probably right. You know, because like what I ended up access to by the time I stopped, because I haven't done anything since I'm 19 years old. But
that's crazy.
She may have been right. Had I stayed in the States, I may have had access to more stuff. Who knows? You can just never know. These are all just hypotheticals on what might have happened. So, it pretty much worked out.
Well, I think it worked out very well, but also I know you described you weren't very good at it. So who knows what would have happened if you just kept on continuing, how your body would have functioned and all that stuff. But you did I think it's called NA. It's like AA, but is it for kids?
No, for Narcotics Anonymous. So, of course, it's supposed to be anonymous, right? But these days, everyone fucking talks about it. But So
Instagram Live,
in the early, because I started going to AA meetings when I was 17. I went to the first one with my dad after over a particularly bad incident. But I didn't tell him I was going because I thought I had a problem. I was just like, I'm just hang out with my dad. Easter vacation of 1993 to give an exact sense of time and place. But I just remember being at the AA meeting and being like, oh shit, man, like I'm already experiencing a lot of the stuff that these guys are talking about by 17. Blackouts and pissing the bed and fighting. And like I'd already had like things that these guys were talking about. Not all of it, you know. I wasn't like, you know, neglecting my kids and all that shit. But, you know, there was enough there that like I was like, oh yeah, shit, man, this is like what I have. And then from 17 to 19, I dip in and out. But then when I finally, when I was like, before I finally got it, somebody at an AA meeting in Ireland, because the AA in Ireland was like a lot of old dudes. But NA, which I was doing a lot of drugs, but like not like heroin or whatever. But, you know, like I would just, whatever could get me out of my head, I would take. And alcohol is just another drug anyway, which is kind of the great debate. But anyway,
I don't drink either.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But Anyway, needless to say, somebody was like, "Oh, you should go to NA. There's a lot of younger people there." So I went to NA meetings in Cork, and everybody was like my age, and everybody was doing the drugs that I was doing, because at the end of the day, that's what people were doing in Cork at that time, you know. And a lot of these guys were fucking up their lives with the drugs that I was taking, and I had really gotten heavy into drugs very quickly because I got in so much trouble with drinking. But then I would take, you know, ecstasy and speed, you know, like rave drugs basically, and I wouldn't get in fights. You know, that was the big thing. It's like I wouldn't black out and end up in fights with strangers. So I was like, this is awesome, you know. But emotionally, it was just destroying me. Like it's a
Awesome.
very quick journey with drugs. Anyway, long story short, I really got connected with that. So when I came back to Ireland sober in the autumn of '95, because I got like a block of time the summer of 1995 after completely fucking up my first year of college, by the way. And I'm aware that this is a very middle class journey of drugs and alcohol. But anyway, I sort of came back on a restart in the autumn of 1995, and I went back to those NA meetings, and like those guys, a lot of them my own age, a little bit older, they're like my core group of support, like for life, you know.
Cool.
So that was another lucky break for me, was that group of guys in NA and Cork, we all just had similar experiences with booze and drugs, and we were just young, and we'd stopped early enough to not like completely damage our lives. And you know, I had a fun early, like late teens, early adolescence without drugs and alcohol, but with young people who were the same. And you know, I still was in college, and I still, like, my closest friends these days are actually guys that I was in college with that were not part of that, you know, guys from the drama society, other friends. You know, that first year sober in the drama society, I was in a play with Cillian Murphy, and like that whole core group of guys were all still friends today from that, my first year of being sober in UCC. And like that core group of guys are still like my closest friends.
You do realize how amazing and rare this story is, not only just, you know, the life and moving to Ireland and all that stuff, but also at 17, 18, 19, wanting to, inverted commas, get better. I know you said you went in and out, but actually putting your hand up and doing it. I know you were first wanted to bond with your dad, but like consistently going, that's very rare for a young person to even kind of like process what's going on, but you kept on going. Very rare. Then obviously you've reaped the rewards. Do you ever like reflect back? Yeah.
Well, it's very rare that your mother would be in your brain from the age of 14 telling you that you're an alcoholic. So my mother, and she was right, honestly, but she had like a pathological obsession with alcoholism.
Yeah.
But she told me at 14, and I really think she was right. She said, "You don't know it yet, but you're an alcoholic, and it's always going to cause you problems in your life." And like, it never was a positive in my life. So by the time I was 19, I was like, what's the point? You know, like, because it was like real suffering, and like, you know, real issues, you know? So I was just lucky. You know, these days it would be framed in more of like a mental health umbrella. And I'd be fine with that too, but I'm also, I'm glad that it was just like a lot of your problems are connected to this behavior. And I don't think that all my problems were connected to that behavior, but I think a lot of them were, you know, and that's still out there in the recovery community. That's great debate about how much is the mental health driving the drinking, or how much is the drinking driving the mental health. And I'm very open to that debate, and I think it's different for every person. But I really do feel that, like, in the absence of like the consumption of mood altering substances has made it a lot easier for me to deal with all my struggles throughout life. Some of my personal internal demons, but also just like the things that life throws at you that are out of your control. Just not having the added stress of alcohol and drugs has just made my life like a lot easier.
I agree with you on that as well. But also, there's so much there. We have to unpack it. We can do 8 podcasts on this. But also to realize it's not working for you. But then there could also be potentially, like when I stopped drinking, no, I was never a big drinker. I mean, what's a problem? I would go out once every 2 weeks and get like blackout drunk. But to me, that was the problem. I'm not doing it that much. But once I realized that it wasn't working for me, there was a lot of shame and people being like, why aren't you drinking and all of that stuff? It's what you do when you're young and you're going out, you meet a pretty girl, whatever, let's go to the club or a bar. It's like so ingrained in society. But for you to, cut it at the age of 19, that's a maturity beyond years. Like that's pretty wild to hear as well. Like you could have just been, oh, I'll just do it a little bit, but you're like, nah, cut it out, not working in the discussion.
Yeah, but it was pretty dramatic, like a lot of the shit. So like it wasn't just like, oh, this isn't working for me. It was just like, this is bad, like really bad. So, and there was like deep, dark depression associated with it. So I had a lot of push factors more than, it wasn't like a conscious decision. And again, I was just very open to like that type of recovery at the time, which I think was to my benefit. I'm glad that I had like a lack of skepticism. That kind of naivety at the time was helped me actually. So I'm glad for that. And that core group of guys that I met, we were all just young and we were searching. We were like going down to this Buddhist retreat center and like reading books about, self-help books like the Celestine Prophecy. That was like the self-help book of the day. And, like we were just like motivating each other to like grow. And like a lot of it was bullshit. A lot of it was like competitive wellness.
I love that.
It's funny because wellness is very mainstream now. It wasn't that mainstream that I'm not saying we were like pioneers, but we literally used to say what we used to say, like people don't understand because we're addicts, So that was our thing. It's like we're different. That was our mentality at the time. We're different, right? So we can't live the way that other people live because we're wired differently. Now it's funny because everybody, podcasts, everything is geared towards wellness, and everybody speaks the way that we used to speak about addicts, quote unquote addicts, right? So now everyone's talking about their struggles in a similar language that we used to say was because we're fucking weird because we can't control our drug consumption, But it turns out that we were just human, flawed humans.
That's hilarious. And last thing on that before we do the questions, but outside of the friendships that you gained, is there anything that you learned from that program that you keep with yourself, whether like maybe you're stressed or things aren't going well? Did they teach you? Because obviously you grew and learned so much about yourself also from your friends, and where you didn't feel the need to do a lot of these things and you've grown and your mental health sounds like it's massively changed since then. Is there anything that you keep with you that helps now?
I mean, there's loads. Where do I start? But I think the number one thing for like what we used to call normies, people outside of recovery, it sounds like a cult. A lot of people think it is a cult. But anyway, the thing that really sticks with me is in the early days, I got so much, positive talk about how your mind is trying to destroy you, which sounds like heavy, but it was just about like not giving in to the negative thought patterns that have been driving your behavior for so long, so it was just great. It was a constant reminder of like what you're feeling is probably not real. You've probably been obsessively thinking. So all you need to do is to just not listen to those thoughts. And then you get into like, now it's like in modern day, I'm like, this is so great because people forget that like your thoughts drive your emotions and your emotions drive your thoughts. So the key is to actually just like try to keep the turbulence low, because you're always gonna have runaway thinking and you're always gonna have like negative emotion. But if both of them are not like raging rapids and both of them are like has a flow that's somewhat easy to navigate, then life is just easier. It's not going to be without its challenges, but life is going to be easier if you don't allow either of those things to really like, drive your thinking. So like at the tough times when like the anxiety's high and the emotions are rising, obviously the thinking's going to be out of control. But if you go, I know that this is bullshit, sometimes you have to keep reminding yourself, keep coming back to like, this is bullshit. But like, at least if you have one weapon. It doesn't always, I know there's people here with severe anxiety that are like, that's bullshit. You can't control it. And they are 100% right. But sometimes it's enough of a weapon against what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful as well. And also, it's a crucial point. You're not necessarily your thoughts. We're going to have so many, and you don't attach to them as well. That's you have reached enlightenment. The Celestine Prophecy and all the books you read, obviously, did
Even though when
wonders.
you think that book was such nonsense, but like
I like that book personally.
I got a lot out of that book. So I'm sure that there's a lot of critiques of it these days, but at that time in my life, which was, I can remember when I read it because my grandmother died, who I never knew. My grandmother died in the UK, and I went to see her in state, and I was staying at a hostel in London, having an argument with somebody about the Celestine Prophecy.
Oh,
So it
really?
was the spring of 1997. I read that book in 1997.
Wow. It's crazy that that book has been passed along, like, I wouldn't say generations, but to different like groups. And I've only ever heard people say that it's been, wonderful.
Well, the figure of 8 is the good one,
The figure
that
of
like
eight.
you need to be an O,
You need to be in there.
that a lot of people are incomplete and they are C's. But then when they meet another C, they feel whole for the first time, but they're not. They're two C's that need each other to feel whole. Whereas you need to be an O, you need to be a complete O. And when you meet somebody, you become the figure of 8. And that was a healthy relationship, which seems so silly. But at the time, I remember being like, yeah, man, you need to be your own person. And then that person adds to your life rather than needing them. Because, I used to have like a lot of codependent relationships.
Well, I admire the journey, and I agree. It's all about internal. Like I'm going slightly off topic, but every wedding that I recently got married, but I made sure this wasn't a thing. Every wedding that I went to, until guy met girl, they weren't complete, but now they're together and they're complete. Their life makes sense. I get that a great partner is very good, but you are complete by yourself. And every bloody wedding, and I see all the single people be like, I'm not complete because I don't have someone. What is wrong with me? It's nonsense. So we just solved the world's problem.
All right, you want the other great quote from that time in my life? Now, the Prophet by Khalil Gibran is another great, like, it was written a long time ago, but it's very popular in the wellness world, and it's good. It's got a lot of like basic wisdom, but on the same topic of how you need to be a complete person and not entirely reliant on your partner emotionally. In the Prophet, it says, like the strings of a lute, they are entirely separate, but when strummed together, they make beautiful music. So just be a string of a lute.
You heard it all here, folks. We should get you a wellness book on top of your other book.
I really need, honestly, back then you couldn't make a wellness career, but I was so arrogant in my knowledge of myself. Like, honestly, I had a time where like, I just literally thought I was so together, which was like, it was just like phase 1, I guess, of like human development. It's like, I need to feel like I'm on top of this, Then life gets, you grow and you realize life is more complicated, and the next stage of life is going to have its own challenges. But anyway, back then, I think that's the time that you need to become like a wellness guy, because you really fucking think you have the answers. And I really thought I had the answers. And that's the time to make money with this shit.
I like how we're all about, be your own person. You're like, guys, this is how you make money. Get on it, right? The Celestine Prophecy too. You can kill it.
Yeah, bingo.
Before we do a quick rapid fire segment, you mentioned questions. I send like mock questions that may come up, may not come up. Were there any questions that sprung to mind that you want to talk about? Or do you want to get onto?
No, you just you fire your you fire your whatever you're going to fire at me. I'm ready.
Sure. Okay. Cool. Okay. Ready to rumble and do a rapid fire segment. And if anything does spring to mind from those questions, feel free to bring it up. What's been your special ingredient to work all these years?
Special ingredient to work?
Yep.
My special ingredient to work is a deep-seated sense that I'm not good enough, so I have to keep trying to prove otherwise.
I'm not going to comment on any of them besides this one. I have heard you talk about imposter syndrome, and you've talked how it's been a motivating factor for you, but also how you've changed the relationship.
I was probably lying. I probably lying when I said that. I was probably trying to pretend that I was healthier than I was.
I disagree. I don't think you can get to the maturity and the career that you've had with having something like that always be? Obviously, there's relationship and it changes. I reckon you have worked on, especially from what I've heard, it hasn't been as prevalent every single day of your life.
No, I tell you the big difference is that like I don't have the same need for success, like for but that I think that also just has to do with just getting older. I think there's probably some science behind that, but like the drive to create is still as strong, but the need for the reassurance of like quote unquote success is less.
That also
But
comes like
I
you
still
knowing
like
yourself. And as you said, you
yeah.
reached enlightenment and, the proof's in the pudding. You've seen it all. So you probably don't need the external validation as much because internally,
Yeah, it also helps that my wife is making loads of money. So come on,
That's the goal. Be wellness and find a rich wife.
yeah.
I
Well, she
love
wasn't
it.
rich when we met, so
Oh,
that's
nice.
what's
So then
even
you
better.
yeah, nice. I love it. There was always a joke in our friendship group was to like hire like a kid that like showed promise of being a basketball player when he was like 15, adopt him when he's 15, just put 2 years of development into him. Then he makes the NBA and then you just, reap the rewards like some of those other families do in the NBA and get the millions of the big bucks.
Yeah, or you can do what they do in South America, where they like invest in promising footballers, and then they get a piece of the action, which always ends
Wow.
up being complicated. But yeah, that's a thing too.
Oh, I'm going to look into that. Back to the rapid fire. What's your favorite thing to do when you're not working?
Oh, well, it used to be exercise, but now that's not as easy as it used to be. But that is generally what I love doing. So I guess these days it's more golf because I can do it at the moment.
And I believe you have done boxing before. You did a boxing match. Can you tell me a bit about
Oh
that?
yeah, I did. I did that back, and I mean, there was a few times in my life where I had like a boxing period, and then in the Joy in the Hood, a show that I did in 2006, I actually did one on that show. But like in general, I just like there was a few times where I was like getting into boxing, and it was awesome. And actually, recently, I've had a little bit of a setback on my knee, but recently, as part of my rehab, I was actually doing some pad work, and that was fun. So I will be getting back to like some better exercise pretty shortly.
I'm excited for you. Boxing is terrifying to me. I've done it probably for a few years and now I'm slowly getting back into it. That's the hardest thing ever. I don't know how you can take the punches. How did you do like a proper fight? Like I heard a while ago you did a fight with someone. Do you know what I'm
No,
talking about?
I did numerous, like none of them were like real. The one fight that was like quote real-ish was the one that I did for that show in 2006,
Oh, gotcha.
where I fought this guy but I had been training with him, but he was a proper boxer, and we had a good match. I mean, it was fun.
I'm glad you think it's fun. I'm sorry for diverting away from the rapid fire. There's a comedian here, Andrew Hamilton, and apparently there's a podcast guy that groups comedians together and to fight for boxing matches. And that's a thing.
Oh, I
He
didn't
gets
know
fun-
that.
Yeah. We'll get you one. I don't know who he is, but if you ever bump into Andrew Hamilton, he might tell you about it. What's your favorite thing about yourself?
Oh, God.
The New Yorker came out in that. Ugh.
Yeah. Oh, favorite thing about myself?
You have to give one.
I'm tall.
How tall are you?
6'3". I'm not like outlandishly
No, that's
tall.
pretty good. That's enough to pass on all the dating apps.
Yeah. I know. Probably the favorite thing about myself is I can get on with everybody.
That's a great skill. Next big dream or goal?
Next big dream or goal? Oh, it will definitely be to like sell more tickets in the States.
Are you coming to Australia for the comedy festival? Any plans coming up?
Not this time, but I'm just gonna have to. I'm probably gonna have to do 2026 at this stage. I just haven't been able to organize. Like having to cancel it last year was bad because that was just a very good time for me to go. But maybe I'll do 2026, or maybe I'll come outside of the festival.
You can do both. You heard it here, everyone. Des is coming. What would you do if you knew you could not fail?
What would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? Shit. I don't know. Actually, fear of failure is not actually as much of a motivator for me.
Nice.
God, I don't know. I would probably fly a plane. I don't know. I can't. I really can't think of one. I mean, if I knew I couldn't fail at this stage, I would fucking play tennis full belt without fear of fucking agony.
Well, it probably shows that you know what you want to do, you do, like especially career-wise as well. Any advice you want to give to people who want to try something different or new, but perhaps are fearful of doing so?
I mean, the advice I always give people that are like, I'm thinking about doing stand-up, what should I do? I always say, well, just get on stage. You know, you just have to do it, because everyone's looking for like, here's the steps. But actually, with things like stand-up, you got to just actually do it. You're going to figure out what you need by doing it. So I would suggest doing it. And some things actually require phases, but find out what step one is and do it. You just have to do it.
Agreed. Well said. Actually, last question. Before I ask how people can follow you and check out your comedy special, which will be in the episode notes, what is the one question I should have asked you?
The one question you should have asked me. I don't know.
Anything you want to tie up? Anything spring to mind?
Nah, man, we covered a lot.
We did a good job.
We covered a lot. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I can't think of any question.
And before we go, how can people follow you and all of that stuff? Check out shows. I'll also have your website will have tour dates.
Yeah, desbishop.net/live is where my tour dates are. The .net is because I lost the .com. Long story. Instagram @desbishop. TikTok desbishop5. Just got there late. Twitter, my Twitter is actually not, I can't get access to it. So if you see my Twitter, it's not that it's not me. It's just I can't post there. So I'm not on Twitter anymore, or X, whatever. And I'm definitely less inclined to be on it than ever before. And that's it. I mean, Des Buffer is my Snapchat, but I don't really.
Snapchat.
I don't really use it.
Yeah, I haven't heard too many people use Snapchat.
I know. Yeah, I don't use it, but if somebody's inclined to go on Snap, I'm there, but I don't post anything.
I can send you some interesting stuff. One of my friends gets a lot of he's in the comedy space as well. He used to get just married women send him stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Back in the Snap days, I used to get some fucking weird shit. But,
Anything you want to
Instagram and TikTok are my main things.
Instagram, TikTok, and I'll
Des Bishop Comedy is my YouTube.
Which special do you want? There's one on it's the same thing, but there's one on your page and then one on 800 Pound Gorilla.
Either one. I mean, obviously, my page is the preference, but I'm actually doing all this press for the 800 Pound Gorilla. I basically re-released the special on 800 Pound Gorilla because I didn't get a chance to promo it because I tore my ACL. So probably go on 800 Pound Gorilla, make them happy.
Wink, wink, but we'll also do.
Well, actually, I will say what the one advantage of the 800 Pound Gorilla one was I made an editing mistake. It wasn't the editor's fault. It was my fault because the last bit, the period sex bit, I never properly looked at that because it was the other bits that needed like a lot of work, and I was like, oh, that bit's fine. And I didn't do the bit right because we recorded twice.
Yeah.
And I used the wrong show for the period sex bit. So I fixed that for the 800 Pound Gorilla. So the last routine, or the second to last routine on the 800 Pound Gorilla one, is a better version than the one that's on mine.
Okay. We'll put both up then. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. You're very inspiring and empowering, and you have a very unique story. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Des raises an interesting point about comments, especially in this day and age with social media. Obviously, feedback is encouraged, but often we can give our power away to an anonymous singular hater. Des encourages us to ignore them negative comment and rather place our focus on those who we trust. As we're all human, the one negative comment can feel like the weight of the world. However, by focusing on this can take away from our authenticity, voice, and craft. So I'll leave you with this epic quote. Sometimes the best reaction is no reaction at all. Anonymous. Thank you for listening to the Funny and Failure podcast, exploring the deeper side of comedy.